Well, I mean, the reason, the vision that I had when I put together the CD was very much to have those sound bites like they are on the CD, and to pair it with a song. My vision of what that those words sound like in a musical sense.
That's the music of Jeremy Pelt, and this is Dave Douglas with A Noise from the Deep, the Greenleaf Music Podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'll be talking to Jeremy Pelt today, great trumpeter, composer, and now publisher and author. He's got a new book called Griot, and it's conversations with musicians about music and culture. It's fantastic, so we'll get into that. We'll get into his new record, This Is Important. Jeremy's also been a great partner on the Festival of New Trumpet Music, so we'll talk a little bit about that festival. I'm really grateful that Jeremy made some time to spend with me. Greenleaf Music is an ongoing endeavor, as you know, and if you can come and join us as a subscriber, I would be extremely grateful. There's no advertising on this podcast other than that, I suppose. But I really do think that you'll enjoy all the music that's over there and all the interviews from this show going back to the very beginning. And it's a pleasure working on the music and continuing to put it out, especially now. And we're hoping that we'll be back together before the end of this year. And I mean 2021. So let's talk to Jeremy Pelt about his new book and about the music. Here's a little bit of that track again. It's called Underdog. Jeremy Pelt, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, man. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, I love the record. This is important. I'm trying to speak it as if there's an exclamation point at the end of the title, because it is. And I wanted to, of course, talk to you about the book that you published also, Griot, Examining the Lives of Jazz's Great Storytellers. And I see it's a volume 1, so that's gives me great hope that we're going to get more of these fantastic interviews that you're doing.
Yeah.
Great. I played a track from the record that's associated with, I guess it's associated with the Griot release. Well, yeah, of course it is. And there's lots of spoken word on it. Not on this particular piece. But after reading the book, I felt like the best thing I could do is do what you did and start from the beginning. So where were you born and when?
I was born in California in November 4th, 1976.
And was music always there right from the beginning for you?
Well, I'm from a family of actors.
Uh-huh.
My father was an actor, and he got my sister involved, and she was an actress. There was maybe a sliver of time where, my mother thought that lightning could strike twice, but it didn't happen with me. Music became, after a while, became a bigger passion. I don't actually even think that acting was something that I was really passionate about. It wasn't like, man, I went and following my sister's footsteps. It wasn't that at all. And in my father's footsteps, it was always music.
What part of California is this that we're talking about?
Well, I was born in Newport Beach, and I spent earlier years a bit in Malibu, and then moved to Beverly Hills, and then after Beverly Hills in the mid Wilshire area, and then the Santa Monica area, so West Los Angeles.
So, yeah, all around LA. Nice. So you said it was always music. I mean, is this like even, are you talking like 3-4 years old? Picking tunes off the piano and this kind of thing?
Well, when I say it was always music, I guess by the time I was, I decided to really get serious about trumpet, then it was always music. And that really took shape. I started playing trumpet about 8-9 years old. And
that's funny. Same as me.
Yeah. When I was in school, just when they still had instruments in school.
Yeah.
So it was something that I took to, and that I was always very excited to do, perhaps maybe a little bit too excited, because my mother, was always like, she embraced the fact that I was into art because that was the family that we came from. Mm-hmm. However, I wasn't much of a scholar. And so, my report cards would, sometimes come back looking less than desirable, except for the gleaming A in music,
Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean,
so I was the opposite. I was the opposite. Music was the only class that I was threatened to fail. And it was because I loved it so much. It was so much fun. I was always goofing around in music class. Yeah. So I almost didn't pass.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing that I was very, very serious about. Even though I tell you, one of the funny things that in 4th grade, one of the incentives that my teacher, Miss Johnson, I remember her, one of the incentives that she always offered, because, she'd send, everybody had a little workbook of things that they had to practice and be able to play the next day. And if you were able to play it, then she'd have like a little plate of cookies.
Wow.
And I would, but the thing was, as excited, and I guess at that point, when I use a word like serious, it's a loose, loose usage of the word, because it wasn't necessarily like I was really applying myself. So
it's aspirational. Let's put it that way. So, but at what age did you sort of hear jazz and decide, oh, this is the direction I want to go?
That was 91. So, before that, I had every intent on becoming a classical player.
Mm.
Um, Mind you, I didn't have any lessons or anything like that. I had, more than anything, I had a deep love and passion for it. I still do, for classical music. And I split that passion equally between playing the trumpet and also conducting, because I'm really into like analyzing scores. And, I have all these recordings of Tchaikovsky or this, that, and I'd really, be into it. So,
So,
and I'm sorry, to answer your question, as far as jazz is concerned, 91, I got to high school and Miles Davis had just died. That was September of 91.
mm-hmm.
And all the years up to that, and mind you, I'd been probably playing trumpet almost 10 years before I got there. I'd never really, I wouldn't say that I hadn't heard jazz, because my mother was a big Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington fan. So it was playing.
Yeah.
It just wasn't something that was like excited me. I was more excited, hearing Handel. But when and the schools that I was attending all had orchestras, full orchestras, if you can imagine that now in this day and age. And by the time I got to high school, two things happened. First of all, Miles had died, and they didn't have an orchestra. They had a jazz band. And I met my instructor, Mr. Magruder, John Magruder. And, first day, one of the upperclassmen comes in and says, "Hey man, I think we should play So What in honor of Miles Davis." And I didn't know what it was.
Wow.
We got our little band books, we played the song, and then he had this big podium and he would point to different people. And and that's when you took your solo.
Yeah.
And so every time he pointed to somebody, I'd look and they would be playing something. Then I'd look at my music and I'm like, what is he playing? Where's, I didn't want to be lost.
Yeah.
So after that, I asked him, I said, well, what were they doing? And he explained to me that they were improvising. I said, well, what's that? And he told me what it was. And then after school, I went to the local CD store, Sam Goody's. And I always, did my due diligence. So I looked for So What. And it was kind of one of those things where it was the first thing that I saw. So it wasn't Kind of Blue. Kind of Blue could have been there, but the first CD that I saw under Miles Davis was live at Carnegie Hall with Gil Evans, and it had So What on it. So I said, okay, this is the song. And I bought it, and it was a tape. I got back home and I put it on, and as fast as anybody could be infected by anything, that's how quickly it happened.
So did you find mentors in your community like soon after that? Once you'd heard that and you were ready to go, were there people around?
I was not. Yeah, I always had to sing about, even then, it was strange, about being a burden. Much more than
absolutely.
And so
absolutely.
In a weird way, I didn't want to burden my mother about, doing things like take me to hear this and take me to hear that. So as a result, hindsight being 2020 and looking back to it, these people were still alive. Dizzy was still alive, but I never had an inkling to go and see them. I was always, always kept to myself anyhow. So, but my mother did see that I was kind of getting serious, and she had friends who were into jazz. And so they would give me CDs. Oh yeah. Oh, you like jazz? Okay, well, here it is. And they gave me like a Lee Morgan CD or this and that. And so I began to collect, and one person that was very instrumental in terms of really continuing my love of the music was my aunt. My Aunt June was who I call the jazz aunt, and who everybody at WBGO knows as jazz. Her name is June, so she was a jazz June. She volunteered with WBGO as soon as they opened. That was like 1983. They started, so she was there from the beginning. She was around certainly at that period. She was born in the early 30s, so I mean, coming up in the 50s and whatnot, she'd seen a lot of these acts.
Yeah.
And she was particularly into the young lions. So she was the reason that I'd heard of Roy Hargrove and Terrence and all these guys. It was her. So she would send me clippings and whatnot of different people. So she was always very encouraging. There was a few programs that were happening in LA at that time. And, there was the Dola Coker Foundation that would sponsor some events that I would sometimes get a chance to go to. Buddy Collette was certainly around, and I got a chance, not enough of that I could actually speak about any kind of lessons because I was still very young and I didn't know who he was. But I do, I remember meeting him and the few times I got a chance to spend, but it's almost not worth talking about because there's no stories that I can tell you about him.
Yeah, but you quickly got to New York. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, it happened.
Maybe June had something to.
It was just the natural succession of things, right? So I graduated school.
Yeah.
Graduated high school, and then I went to Berkeley. And after I graduated Berkeley, I moved right to New York, and that was in 1998.
Okay. All right. So I'm about 10, let's put it this way. I'm about 10 years. I got 10 years on you, Jeremy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. I graduated high school and went to Berkeley in 81.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the year that I got a few, yeah. But it's a funny thing relating to Miles Davis, and how influential he's been, for everybody really. But that was the year that he reemerged with Man with the Horn. And so there was this excitement of coming in like, oh my God, Miles put a record out, and that's all we wanted to play at that time. Fat Time and all these tunes. But I remember hearing you. It couldn't have been long after 98, if that's when you got here. And then we've crossed paths working on this nonprofit festival of new trumpet music, and we put together a few concerts together. But this whole idea...
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'll say this. One person that I do remember when I first... Because you got to also... I didn't mention this earlier, but I also grew up kind of in New York as well, in the Bronx, because my whole family's from New York.
Okay. I see.
And I do remember seeing Roy Campbell.
Wow.
And meeting Campbell, and I don't have it anymore, but I remember he used to play sometimes like in Grand Central Station.
Yes.
And I got his card. I remember because he was playing flugelhorn, and it was the most beautiful sound.
Oh, that's great.
And I went to him and I got his card. I didn't never followed up, but
That's a great story. He's one of the first trumpet players I met when I moved to New York, because we were both playing on the street with bands, and we were in rival street bands. And so you weren't really supposed to be friendly with the people in the other band, but he was such a sweetheart. And, I was friends, and we started that trumpet festival together, and boy, what a hero, and what a sad loss.
Yeah.
Definitely. That he's not here. But anyway, I was going to get to this whole idea of griot because over the years since 98, what is that, 23 years, I didn't know that you were out interviewing people and part of this larger project. And, when I saw, I think on one of your social media feeds, the announcement of the book and the publishing, I just went out, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I got to go, get that. And then I started reading it, and I was immediately called you up and said, okay, we got to talk about this. This is fantastic. But is that an idea that you had for a long time to be an agent of transmitting the message of a culture through the arts? And
it probably, I would say that it started to materialize in very small bits and pieces after I read Notes and Tones, which would take me to my beginning years at Berkeley, because I worked in the library.
Wow,
so I found
fantastic. Whoa.
And I was just immediately taken by it. And it's a book that you can always come back to, which is always something, because it means those stories, just like music, means different things to you at different points in your life and experience. And so I don't know I can't even tell you how many times I've read the book, but what I could tell you is that probably in my earliest days in New York, I probably started thinking, man, somebody should. This is what I call it the somebody shoulds. So always somebody should do something like this for this person. Somebody should do this. Somebody, and it would it would happen every once in a while. It wasn't something that I was pursuing, certainly, but then in 2018. I was sitting on the couch, and I heard, and I was just going through my YouTube, right, just looking at different interviews, and I saw this interview with Warren Smith, and he was interviewing Art Taylor at the Schomburg Center in Harlem, and when I saw it, I was just immediately. I was just transfixed to the computer for the duration of the interview. And at that point, and this is 2018, I decided I went from somebody should to I should do it. And especially because, I mean, when you think about the fact that now 2018 marked 20 years exactly that I'd been in New York, and through those years, I had become friends with a lot of my elders that were playing, and so I felt I had a good enough rapport to where I could reach out and ask them, and that's what I did, and that's when that started.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you more about the project, about the meanings and everything, but it's a music podcast, so if I don't play some music right now, I think I'm gonna lose some points. And the music is so great. You have this tune called "Don't Dog the Source." It's, I guess, related to.
It is. Yeah, I mean, J.D. Allen is somebody that I've always looked up to. He's a fantastic tenor player. I met him when he was with Betty Carter. And then again, I'd see him, on the New York scene when I first moved to town. And when I really put together, and I had little bands that I, earlier on, but when I made my first real band that was working, my quintet, I chose JD, and we played together for 6 years. That band with JD Allen and Danny Grissett on piano and Dwayne Burnell on bass and Gerald Cleaver on drums.
Wow.
And me and JD used to talk all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And we still, less so now because just we're busy with different things. But particularly when we were on the road, we'd have a lot of time to talk. And he was always somebody that had, like, he was like a sage. He always had these like profound statements that he would make. And then when I interviewed him, it was, it was just like, you couldn't keep up with the amount of profound statements that he was doing. And that one, Don't Dog the Source, really stuck out to me because what he was talking about, which is in the book, is he was responding to a question. I'm paraphrasing myself, where I was asking him something along the lines of what he thought about music today, that cats were putting out, and he said, yeah, and that's when you hear the record. He said, well, it's not about if I dig it. It's he said he doesn't care what cats, brothers and sisters are putting out, but don't dog the source, as in, still respect the lineage of music, and especially as it pertains to Black people, practitioners of the music, especially the young Black practitioners. Sometimes they get swayed by critics and try to fall into a category of shunning or admonishing in some type of way the music, the source of the music, that way that they, somehow they can get more brownie points or more write-ups by trying to be anti-jazz and whatnot. And so his point was, look, don't dog the source. You can do whatever you want to do, but don't sit over here and talk about. And he said, don't hate your nose, don't hit your lips, don't hit, because this is where you came from. So even if you're playing, whatever kind of genre that you want to call it, it comes from someplace, and that someplace is you're part of that lineage. So don't ever speak ill of it.
Let's hear a little of that. It's great. It's a great tune. Beautiful playing.
Thank you.
Don't Dog the Source brings us right to the heart of the Griot project and what it's about, really. At least in my reading of how many different interviews are in this first volume?
15.
Yeah, 15. And there's such a variety of thoughts and feelings and opinions. And that's one of the things that I really loved about it. And also that you asked similar questions to everybody and how different everybody's answers were.
Right.
So how would you describe maybe the goal and the scope of the Griot project?
What I set out to do was to, so the other reason besides the somebody shoulds, so what I normally say when I'm describing the project to somebody, especially if the person is of a certain age that might remember something like Notes and Tones, is that it is essentially an expansion of Notes and Tones, which is a book that Art Taylor put out in the late 70s, early 80s, where he interviewed his peers. I think that's the template that this book is set on. I think where it deviates slightly, even though every single interview that Art did, they did talk about Black social issues.
Yeah.
But my questions, I feel like, were more pointed towards that fact from the get-go, rather than how they normally got into it. And not that that's even a big difference, but I do think that there was more of an agenda with mine. And that agenda comes from the fact that I do feel like there is a bit of a disconnect between, an intergenerational disconnect that exists on the scene for whatever reason. And a lot of that has to do with lack of accessibility to the source, or the sources that exist. And so my immediate goal was to have a book that people could read and revisit. That was the other thing, is that, people were saying, well, you should make it a podcast or something like that. But I was very adamant about having a tangible object, a book that you could always go back to and read at different parts of your life, just like I did with Notes and Tones.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you see how your lives are parallel to some of the older generations. So that's really what this book is about from my end. And my impetus of putting it out was to kind of bridge a gap that I know exists
between an older generation and a younger generation, and transmit, and especially in terms of Black American culture and where the music comes from, and if I understand you correctly, spreading access to the source.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So do you feel like when you went to some of the interview subjects, it's funny because Art Taylor, I mean, the interviews must have been in 68, 69, maybe 70.
Some of them.
Because he
so
asks,
they spanned quite a few years. So I think maybe the earliest might have been 66.
But he asks everybody about the Beatles. What do you think about the Beatles?
Well, you know why? Because that was a big issue back then.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah.
It was a big issue.
And it's also fascinating to hear what Thelonious Monk says and what Miles Davis says, and
exactly.
It's just incredible.
There were people, I remember, I wish I had really had this idea back when I was talking to people like Pete LaRocca and cats that were just like, their whole career got derailed and they look at a group like the Beatles, as being one of the reasons.
Wow.
So it's like, wow.
Yeah.
So
you think that's one of the reasons Art Taylor was asking that question of everybody?
Well, I think so. I think it for much of the same reason that you see the same questions that I ask everybody is to see with different reactions and
Yeah,
different answers.
and everybody did react differently, but
Yeah.
it didn't feel it felt like pretty organic relationship to what
Right,
you were talking about, like recognizing the source
right.
and uh, talking openly about racism and about the experience of living in America.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I just it's such a complex issue, and
Yeah,
everybody came at
absolutely.
it differently, but you got honest and really thorough responses, and so I that's one of the things I really enjoyed about it.
Thank you.
So you're publishing more of these.
I am. I
How
am.
many?
I mean, it's one of the things that I always like to make known is that I feel like some people, which is it can be understandable. So I'm not frustrated at all about it, but I also feel the responsibility of making it known that the first volume of interviews was out of a pool of 35 interviews that I had up to that point.
Yeah.
So I just chose out of that pool what I
Yeah.
wanted to put out first. But it's
Yeah.
also an ongoing process. So I'm still interviewing people to this day.
That's great. You have this tune called Solidarity on the album.
Yeah,
What do you want to set that up?
sure. So that was Solidarity is inspired by an interview that I did with the late Harold Mayburn. And Harold, having taught at William Patterson for nearly 40 years before he died, I started teaching at William Patterson in 2016. However, I'd known Harold for years before that, having played with him, been around him for quite some time, gotten many chances to talk to him. And so this was one of those things where we both taught on the same day, and there were some times where it would align that both of our days were over at the same time.
Mm.
And the thing about Harold and speaking about his dedication to his job, he didn't have a car. And William Patterson is way out in Wayne, New Jersey. And Harold lived near JFK. So
That's
he
like
would have he
one
would
of
be
the
taking public transportation
one of the
from
classic bad commutes
yeah,
would be
And so I gave him a ride back to the city. And it was one of those things where in my mind, I'm like, I got to interview him while he's in the car. And so that's what it was. I put on my recorder and I got to interviewing him. And that particular part of the song was dedicated to his comments about how the scene was and how healthy the scene was with the cats and how they loved each other and how they gave it up easily to each other while they were there. Sometimes we in a culture where you don't necessarily know what a cat feels about somebody until they're dead. You know what I mean? I mean, I hate to point it out, but it's like, Roy Hargrove has always been heralded. So I mean, he's not in any danger of being his importance being somehow mitigated. But at the same time, I feel like there are a lot of people that go hard on Roy now, like, oh man, Roy meant this that you didn't really hear about before his passing. And I think with Harold, what he was saying was, I mean, in any given day, if you talk to like Art Taylor and say, hey man, Art man, you sound great. And he was like, well, all I'm doing is playing Philly Joe stuff. Or Art Carter would be like, yeah, I'm still listening to PC.
Wow.
And with PC's like 2 years older than Ron. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
wow.
Not that age is the defining character, but it's just that the immense respect these cats had for each other
yeah
was on full display um, unprompted a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
in a way that it's not. So that was interesting to me.
Before I play this, can I ask you, did you get to interview Roy before he passed?
That's one of the
Ah,
things I wish I
I'm
did. I
sorry to
wish I
hear
did.
that.
Well,
But
so interestingly enough, um, Roy died in 2018. I had the idea to start doing the interviews in 2018, but the way that I first saw myself doing these, my main thing about the interviews at that point was that I wanted to get my elder Black musicians that had not really gotten the credit that I felt like they would do for whatever reason. And so I was really seeking those people out. So that's why there's a Paul West. That's why,
yeah,
there's a Birth of Hope,
yeah,
cats that should have even more recognition than they did. And then I think the thing that made me deviate from that concept a bit was that I was on the road with Kenny Barron. And I said to myself, because we were in Boston for 2 days at the Regatta Bar, and I said, I'm going to kick myself if I don't interview Kenny Barron. And he's there. And Kenny
mm-hmm.
Barron, Kenny, he's the sweetest, most
Mm-hmm.
generous
Yeah,
person. So he
yeah,
said yes. And at that point, that's when I was like, you know what? Let me not be too just rigid on my requirements.
mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started to go for the Kenny Barons and Lewis Hayes and, people that were in my
Yeah,
orbit. And then I started to say, okay, well, let me go ahead and include the younger generation after that. So then that's when you have, Larry Willis, well, Larry
Ambrose.
and Kenny are the same
Yeah,
age. But Lewis Hayes, Lewis Nash rather, and Peter Washington. And then I said, well, okay, let me get some of my
yeah,
generation. And then, I think the first person in my generation I got was Jonathan Blake.
mm,
And I got some people that were in Roy's generation, Justin Robinson.
mm-hmm.
So I basically just eased up on my kind of the restraints that I imposed on myself at
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Wow.
And to that effect, by the time I did that was actually post Roy's passing, because
Mm,
Kenny's interview was November as well, but it was later in November. Roy died actually the day before my birthday, November
mm,
3rd.
mm.
And I got Kenny like I think right before Thanksgiving or something like that.
Wow. Wow. Solidarity. That's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
We shouldn't let this go without mentioning the band. You've been playing with Chen Chen Lu on Vibes for a good number of years now, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
met her actually, I think in 2018 as well. Um, I met her when I was doing a week over at Banff.
oh, wow.
VJ I invited me to teach in one of the weeks,
Yeah.
and I met her there in 2018 in that summer, and I was like, I got to get your number. And
Oh,
the first
fantastic.
recording, and she was, pretty much brand new to the scene. The first recording I put her on was my CD 2 CDs ago called Jeremy Pelt the Artist. And that was her first commercial recording. And then subsequently we went on the road. We spent a great deal of 2019 on the road. And that was her first time to Europe, to a lot of places.
Mm. And Victor Gould, Vicente Archer, Alan Mednard, and then Brandy Younger, I guess, is on one track on the CD, and
Yes.
Ismail Wignall is on a few different tracks on percussion.
Yes.
But it's a great band. Sounds really
Thank you.
wonderful. So back to the book for a minute. I had a sort of a takeaway from the big question that you got to in every interview. I don't want to phrase it right. I'm paraphrase it in general about identity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you define yourself as a Black American jazz artist? And what does that mean to you? And how do you? And it felt to me like in a lot of the interviews there was a sort of two overlays to how people would respond to that question. One would be, it's all music, it's
Mm-hmm.
universal. I don't think of it that way. And then the second is the overlay of perception
Yeah.
of how it's received in society. And so on that level, naming it becomes more important to people
Mm-hmm.
because, well, it's not in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I need to clarify that the thing that is not an overlay and that is the reality of how people are actually treated is just the facts on the ground. It's sort of background to all the answers that people gave. And I don't want to give the impression that that's not an important part of the topic here. So do you feel like that's a fair takeaway from a lot of the responses you got?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it needs really any takeaway, because I mean it's right there. It's from interviewee to interviewee what they actually think about it. So I mean, I don't necessarily even see it as being something that's open to any kind of interpretation. I think whatever it is, it's fair to what their vision of themselves are, and that was one of the beautiful things that I saw about every interview that I've done. Obviously with those 15, but also with the 50 that I also have, is that everybody has a different. Well, I mean, some people's are similar, but there are sometimes disparate, small disparate opinions. Sometimes they're large disparate opinions of of
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
of what it is. So I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing. It's really according to what their experience has been.
Yeah. But the two different layers of it, the artistic activity itself, and then the reception and the dealing with all the, I'm not going to use a bad word, but all the stuff
Mm-hmm.
well, globally, but especially in America, let's say.
Yeah.
That's like that was really inspiring to me because it's just everywhere in everything, and it doesn't get talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear people, especially the people you talk to, honestly opening up about their relationship to the art and the craft and their relationship to the rest of the world and what happens out there and all
Mhm.
the crazy, stupid stuff
Right.
that goes on around commentary about the music and racial commentary and reception and privilege and uh, stuff that should just be, like you said, out in the open, not open to interpretation. It's just right there. And yet it doesn't get talked about that much. So
Mhm.
that seems like, for you to have that as the big question was really significant
Mhm.
in the scope of the project. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's that's a lot of the reason why I asked the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so pivoting from Griot for a minute, you've been volunteering your time and your vision and talents to the Festival of New Trumpet Music for a lot of years now. And I know that it's been important to you not only as a player, but also as a mentor.
Mhm.
So, like you're talking about Griot being um, not so much mentorship, but more like passing along the message
Mhm.
to future generations. And I think, do you see that happening in the music too? Just on a purely, I don't want to put it in terms of the instrument, the trumpet, but
Mhm.
just the music in general.
I see it happening. I see it as something that needs to happen more. But to be quite honest, I do see a lot of reticence,
Hmm.
um, particularly on the side of the people that we're trying to pass down information to.
Hmm.
And that's disheartening,
Hmm.
um, because it's like you're trying to sidestep a process, and because to an extent the media will let you sidestep that process, you see that it's actually you're able to do that. You know what I mean?
Well,
Whereas
often with encouragement.
with encouragement, yes. And that is not in line with the concept of the music,
Hmm.
really. That's more of a pop concept, if anything. So yeah, I do see it. I remember when Roy would always have young cats in his band.
Mm-hmm.
He would have young cats in his band, but then there were times where he would also tip his hat to bringing in mentors to him. So then you would have Ronnie Matthews on piano, or you would
Right.
have Larry Willis,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was something that I always found special about Roy.
Hmm.
And in my own participant, in my own experience, being with being the product of that kind of environment, to where people took me under their wing, put me in their bands. I find it, indispensable. I find it just incredibly important to shaping how you go about leading. There are a lot of cats out there right now, young cats that don't know how to lead a band, that are band leaders, and don't realize the whole scope of the role,
Yeah.
other than I'm in the front of the band and it's my band and I count off the song. You know what I mean?
Right. And my
And
picture's on the poster.
yeah, exactly. But there's a whole scope that they don't learn because they don't have that experience. And
Right.
what's more, they don't seek out that experience. And there are, and to play my own devil's advocate, there are situations, quite frankly, to where it's such a competitive environment that you have to end up doing your own thing, or else you're just not going to play at all. So I definitely understand that, but as more of that concept tends to seep in, then it becomes the norm, in terms of
Yeah.
how you choose to interact.
Yeah.
And that's a drag, because I mean, sometimes it's not even about playing in such and such a band as much as it's about being around a situation where you could at least go and ask them questions.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I mean,
and also just observe, just learn from observation. Absolutely. I mean, I would just add, I know you won't disagree, but and I don't want to be in defense of the younger generation, but a lot of those gigs that you and I learned a lot of stuff on, life lessons as well as musical lessons, a lot of those gigs aren't really there anymore for this generation.
And that's why I really posted up about that being my devil's advocate. But the other side of it is, again, it's like I said just a minute ago, sometimes it's not even about the playing with this person. You know what I mean? Look, I wanted to play with Elvin Jones before he died. I never got that chance. I certainly saw him, so I have some kind of perspective.
Yeah,
you know, there were players that I met several times that I never got a chance to actually formally play with, that I get a chance to talk to. And learn just from doing that.
Right.
So it's being a part of the culture.
Right.
And let's keep in that way, and being open to the advice. And it doesn't necessarily mean, Art Taylor had something interesting to say about that in this interview that I was telling you about with Warren Smith, where he was talking about, he said, I always listen to everything that everybody's saying.
Yeah.
So I don't have to agree with it. You know what I mean? But and that's a true thing. It's not necessarily, when I talk to younger cats, it's not what I say is etched in stone.
Right.
But what it is it opens another part of your brain to think, to consider different things of what I'm saying.
Yes.
And you can take it with a grain of salt or not, but now it's part of a program that's been offered to you.
Yes. I think.
And so, and then so, as I see mentorship as a very important part of this music. And so it is my aim to hire cats that I feel like are somebody that could be molded into something that I'd like to present in my music, but also are somebody that has ears and listens to what I'm saying and considers it as somebody that has experienced a lot of what they have yet to experience.
Well, and I think one of the key words you used a little ways back was openness.
Yeah.
And for many, many, many reasons with how we communicate now, that maybe is more of a challenge to experience the world with that open mind and realizing, I have all these opportunities to learn and listen to everything that everybody plays and that everybody says, and to go there. So I thought that's a really important insight, man. Let me play some music. This is looking at the title. I'm not gonna. Well, actually, you have the part of the word X'd out on the CD anyway, but I'm gonna call it A Beautiful Effing Lie.
Yeah.
that's such a beautiful piece. All of these pieces on the album, which again is called, it's on High Note, and it's called Griot. This is important. And I was just going to ask you, I know we got to wrap up in a minute, but is there a way that you would sum up how these particular compositions relate to the Griot project?
Well, I mean, the vision that I had when I put together the CD was very much to have those sound bites like they are on the CD, mm-hmm. and to pair it with a song. My vision of what those words sound like in a musical sense. I mean, I was a film scoring major in school, and I've always been very interested in that regard, in pairing music to motion picture. But now this isn't motion picture, right? So these are words, but still the words tell more of a story than the motion picture, because you hear the inflections of how they're spoken to you, and therefore you could approximate, I guess, what that experience sounds like in your own musical palette.
Wow. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining me. I know that you just put this out, and there's hardcover and there's paperback. So I don't want to make it sound like, okay, when is the next one? But when is the next one?
I'm having so much fun with this one, and I'm excited to release them. I feel like, it's funny. I've had many interviews. For some reason, my record label releases my CDs at the same time every year, right? So people were saying, we're used to knowing that January was like Jeremy Pelt month. Now it's kind of seeped into February. And so with that said, I think I'll probably do something, although not music related, to every book. Certainly, I don't want to, beat that horse. But in terms of the book itself, yeah, I think that I'll put it out again next year, the next volume, because it's one of those things it's an easy thing to do because I have all the interviews. So it's just a matter of choosing which ones I want to put in and transcribing them, and then setting them to press. So to answer the question, yeah, next year, expect volume 2.
I call you January Pelt. But you make it sound simple, but you've published it yourself. So aside from just the transcriptions, then the proofreading, then making sure everything's right, then probably a little editing, and then typesetting, and the layout of the book is beautiful. And you're doing this on your own. You don't have a publishing company. You're releasing this through your own platform, and people come to your website to get the book. Is that right? So yes. JeremyPelt.com is
JeremyPelt.net.
JeremyPelt.net is where people are going to find the link to order it, and it's I ordered it there and it was really smooth. I think you're using Shopify. Is that right?
Shopify. So I mean, if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, the links are all there too. So you could always click there too. But yeah,
do you want to shout out your various handles?
Instagram is Jeremy Pelt the Griot. Facebook. I mean, if you go to my fan page, because Facebook only lets you get 5,000 friends, right? So fan page is the real Jeremy Pelt fan page, and Twitter, I believe, is JP the Griot.
Oh, I was looking for you on Twitter earlier in the day, and I couldn't. Come. But I tried all these combinations, and I didn't find it. So now I know. Yeah. You said it's JP the Griot.
JP the Griot, yeah.
Oh, like underscore or anything in there. Just
no.
okay, sounds good. Sounds good. I mean, I'm a big fan of independent production and putting things out yourself and having complete control and ownership. And it's a really empowering, project on so many levels. That it's exciting to see you doing it. I hope it's not too much work. I hope you got somebody going to the post office with all those packages.
At the moment, it's just me. It's just me. But I mean, there's no better time to do it at the moment, though, right? I mean, it's not like I'm on the road, So, my little corner of a room looks like a fulfillment center, and I'm all but happy to do it. Because it's something that I set out to do. It's like, I appreciate it. You can't complain too loudly about these type of things. You know what I mean? And that's the way I look at it. So if I'm inundated with orders, I mean, there are worse things in the world.
Right. You don't want to be complaining. That would be the that old musician joke. How do you make a musician complain?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, but I mean, hopefully to that point, we start to get vaccinated, things start to open up, things get a little easier. Maybe we'll be playing before this year is out and we'll be going around. I mean, you've been doing a lot of live stream shows, and I know you have one. Well, you've been doing a lot of them. So you've been out there playing, and that's great. But they'll be real gigs.
Yeah, it's been great. It hasn't been as many as it was last year, which gave me more impetus to really focus on this project in terms of the book. But this month is a bit busier. There's an uptick in actual playing activity. So I'm excited for that.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to me about it. I mean, really inspiring book. I just flew right through it, so I'm ready for volume 2. But it's I can't. I think that your description of it as a response to Notes and Tones by Art Taylor is the most accurate thing.
Yeah,
and it really is a great follow up, and the music is great too. And it's always great to talk to you, Jeremy. So
thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm going to go out with your tune. How appropriate. Relevance. Thanks for listening to the Greenleaf Music Podcast. That's the music of Jeremy Pelt. That tune is called Relevance. And we appreciate Jeremy's kind words and his great book, Griot. Pick it up at his website, jeremypelt.net, and join us at greenleafmusic.com to subscribe and get all of the music that we release. We hope you do. We hope you'll see you there. And take care. Happy listening. Thanks.